This is Pet Life Radio. Let's talk pets.
Hello, you're listening to Animal Party on Pet Life Radio. And if you've been listening to me talking on the radio for a few years, you probably remember back in 2021, I was talking a lot about coyotes. Yes, coyotes were biting people in the big park here in downtown Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Huge, beautiful park in the middle of downtown. Forest and sea and ocean, beautiful, beautiful 10K run around the outside. It's a lovely place, Stanley Park. But the coyotes were attacking people, and they ended up killing 11 of them because of it. And people were feeding them. And they caught the couple that was doing it. It was a 70-year-old couple, and they finally went to court, and they're going to end up paying quite a lot of money. And because it was intentional. They were feeding the animals intentionally. They say they were trying to feed birds and smaller animals and not the coyotes. But at the time, it was all over the news, and children were being hurt. People were being hospitalized. Grown men were being chased. So in the end, they caught the people who were actually feeding the coyotes. And hopefully they did it in a very public way so people will stop feeding wildlife. All it does is put people at risk and the animals at risk. So around here we say a fed bear is a dead bear. So don't feed the wildlife. If you really want to get close to them, get a zoom lens. Don't feed them. Okay, everybody, we are here today with Souha Ezzedeen. This is our second show because last time we ran out of time. It was just too good. And we're talking about the Way of Life dog training, which is her new book. And there's going to be links posted alongside this show. If you want to buy the book, and I think you should, all you got to do is click. So welcome to the show, Souha.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back.
Well, last time we talked about socializing your dog and the attitude of the handler.
Yes.
And the drive and food and how to use that to train the dog. So we kind of covered 3 of your main points, but we didn't get to number 4. So when you're reshaping the way your dog thinks about you and its world, what's number 4?
Number 4 is what I call managing space and boundaries. So I'll give you an example, Deb. When we first bring a dog home, one of the things we love to do with this new dog is give this new dog the run of the house, the run of the yard, take him to the off-leash dog park, take him to a hike and cut him loose in the woods.
Take him to the office, take him to the mother-in-law, take him to the park, take him to the pet store.
Yes, exactly. Take him not only everywhere, but also to give a level of freedom that is not appropriate for the level of relationship that we have with that dog at that time. It is no wonder so many dogs that are new, that are freshly acquired, freshly adopted, get lost so quickly because we're not careful of maintaining space and boundaries with a dog that is not yet attached to us, a dog that doesn't know us yet, a dog that could be freaked out, wants to go back to wherever they came from. So we need to, establish space and boundaries with new dogs and then eventually loosen up. But if we start off loose, we can never end up with a dog that can handle freedom responsibly. I want to tighten up the level of choice that a dog has in the beginning and then eventually give them more and more and more with time. Ultimately, the aim of the Way of Life method is to raise dogs that are sound, strong, and spirited, and that ultimately can enjoy a life where, to the extent that I can, I don't need to have a leash on this dog, that they can really enjoy freedom of movement, freedom of choice, but that they would have been raised, Deb, in a way that they can handle that. But we're putting the cart before the horse and giving this dog freedom that not only they're not ready for, but that is not their highest priority. When a dog is new in my home and they're a rescue and who knows what they've experienced already, their priority is to feel safety, which I give through structure and minimizing freedom. And then eventually freedom becomes something that we practice over time, and it becomes the result of dog guardians that would have taken their time at foundations, taken their time with that primordial socialization I talked about earlier. And then eventually freedom, like trust, becomes the result of a way of life that's been designed correctly.
I want to ask you at this stage, because recently in England, they decided to make a ban against what they call XL
Yes,
bullies.
I heard. Yeah.
American bully dogs. Well, I'm just going to tell the audience too. So it's basically the pit bulls and the large American bulldogs and anything square faced and tough looking that you might think of as a bulldog is now you have to spay and neuter. You can't breed, you can't sell, you can't rehome. If you have one now, you can spay, neuter, microchip, get huge insurance. The police will call on you to make sure that your place is appropriately set up so the dog can never escape. I mean, the measures are huge. And
Right.
there's in public, they must always be on lead and muzzled. It makes it very, very difficult to want to own one of these dogs. Your life will be extremely curtailed and the cost is huge. But it makes me wonder, like, I personally don't fear training these dogs and don't refuse them at my boarding kennel
Right.
and don't have, I mean, a bad dog's a bad dog, a good dog's a good dog. And yes, these dogs, when they're difficult, can be dangerous because they're armed to the teeth. And some of them, I did a show with Dr. Stan Corn years ago about this, and he mentioned, or maybe a year ago, he mentioned the fact that because so many bad apple people are breeding for bad reasons, this type of dog, the gladiator fighting dog, has bad members overrepresented in their genetics because that's what they've been shooting for all these years. The same way hunters wanted good retrievers who wouldn't kill the duck, these people have been breeding for opposite traits. So the market gets flooded with their rejects. So there is the fact that these dogs, perhaps because of the bad breeding, may be more of a risk. But I just shudder when I hear a breed law like this. I just think it's so indiscriminate. What do you think of this?
Yes, well, here in Ontario, as you know, we also have a breed ban on, pit bull or pit bull type dogs. And I agree with you, Deb. I'm not a fan at all of this kind of broad, sweeping legislation where many dogs will definitely be treated very unfairly because of others that, have, as you said, the many bad apples where now they've contaminated the entire breed in the mind of the public and therefore in the minds of politicians looking for, quick quote unquote solutions that don't work. Those sweeping breed bans end up really hurting the animals more than any other stakeholder and not doing much to educate the owners, the handlers, and even the trainers that deal with these kinds of dogs, because they tend to be treated with a great deal of harshness and force because we think that that is what the breed requires. When in my experience, that makes these kinds of dogs even more difficult, even more dangerous, even harder, treated with hardness, and they will respond with hardness. So, I agree with you. I would not turn away this kind of dog. I would not refuse to work with this kind of dog at all. And, I find that the breed excuse is one of those ways that we explain dog behavior, and I talk about that in the book, that is not helping us. Now, that doesn't mean that the breed doesn't have its place in the entire equation of a dog's behavior. Breed is powerful.
It's very powerful. Like I tell Sheltie owners, if you call a Sheltie and you walk toward it, it will not come. It's bred to follow. Like you just can't do it. But you can walk toward a lab and call it. It'll sit and wait for you. It's a different breed.
There are breed differences, and to deny breed differences, it's disenchanted, it's not helpful. Of course, the breed matters, but my entire philosophy, as I said, is based on the way of life. What does the way of life of that dog look like? Let us design a way of life that makes sense and eventually give it some time. And now we have a steady dog on our hands. But unfortunately, this has been happening so much, so frequently. One incident can be one too many, and now you have these kinds of actions on the part of governments and jurisdictions, etc. I began my volunteering career, Deb, at Toronto
Mhm.
Humane Society in the wake of the pit bull ban here in Ontario. And it was
Uh,
unbelievable the number of dogs that made their way into the shelter. There were even some dogs that had stayed there for months and months and months until their owners could figure out a way to get them back and out of province. Or so we not only took on dogs and then put them up for adoption or tried to get them out of province, but also there were dogs that we housed for a while until they could go back home. So it was it was heartbreaking to see that many dogs suffering as a result of this kind of generalization. So anyhow, the breed matters, but so does the way of life. So again, I would
Yeah.
ask questions. How did we socialize this dog? How did we train this dog? Did we train it harshly? Did we train these dogs to actually be even more prey driven, be even more powerful? And there are ways to settle them down. So I'll give you an example is that we have this idea that with this kind of a dog that they need to be exercised a lot, that you need to put them on a bike or you need to put them on, take them on, running by your ATV, right? High intensity, high energy kind of exercise. Well, that has its place, but one can overdo.
Yes, because then you get an extreme athlete who never gets
Yes,
enough. I've seen that.
correct.
I've seen that with the standard poodles, which is not a serious problem. But my standard poodles who live here, when they're in their prime, they run with every group of dogs. They're in such peak shape. If I take them on a 10K run, they come back and keep running. Like there's just no limit when the dog's that super fit. And you don't want a dog with behavioral problems to be super, 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 super athletic and fit and intense and craving exercise every day. I totally agree with that.
That
There's
is
a
okay
place
to do,
for it.
though. But if you know how to manage the other aspects of the way of life in a way that balances out the high energy, high intensity exercise that, let's say, you want to give your dog, that is all right. I'll tell you where I see this, Deb, is in clients that come to me with very sporty dogs.
Yeah, like Vizslas.
They're in agility, they're in flyball, they're
Right.
in barn hunt, they're in herding, they're doing all these sports. And the dog is, constantly stimulated and energized and exercised in those ways. And then we come back home and related to the aspect of space and boundaries, we come back home with this high drive, high intensity dog, and then we give the dog freedom around the house. No, you have a dog like that you have in sport, that you have in high intensity exercises and activities, come back home and rest them, you know.
Yes. Yes, like police dogs. They don't work every day, every
Exactly.
hour. Yes,
Examples.
where they can just tune out and go to sleep.
Correct.
And work is not, it's not time to work. Okay, we're going to go to a break and we're going to come back on Animal Party Pet Life Radio with our guest, Souha Ezzedeen. Stay tuned.
Take a bite out of your competition. Advertise your business with an ad in Pet Life Radio podcasts and radio shows. There is no other pet-related media that is as large and reaches more pet parents and pet lovers than Pet Life Radio. With over 7 million monthly listeners, Pet Life Radio podcasts are available on all major podcast platforms. And our live radio stream goes out to over 250 million subscribers on iHeartRadio, Odyssey, TuneIn, and other streaming apps. For more information on how you can advertise on the #1 pet podcast and radio network, visit PetLifeRadio.com/advertise today.
Let's Talk Pets on PetLifeRadio.com.
Hello, we're back on Animal Party Pet Life Radio with Souha Ezzedeen. And when I began my career, people were big on getting border collies and then putting them on Prozac because they were OCD, so the people said, and they wouldn't sit still.
Allegedly.
And they got the border collies because they were ranked the smartest dogs and the intelligence of dogs. But so were poodles and Dobermans. But anyway, they got the border collie and then they gave it a couch potato life and wondered why it wasn't satisfied. So those dogs, I used to tell people, you got to give your dog way more exercise. This is not on. You got to teach it fetch, take it to the dog park. If you're a couch potato and you've got a shepherd dog that's meant to herd animals, you got to get it out. But what you're talking about is people who go too far the other way. And I've had people who will argue with me that it's okay to take their dog on a very fast run at age 10 or older in the heat of the day during a heat wave because he's always been fine. And so sometimes there's that going on too, where you really have to give people, animals age quick. When your dog's 10 or 8, he's not able to do what he could do at 2, 3, or 4. You're talking about an old man now. And he will keep up with you just because he loves you and he loves the game and he's used to it and it's his routine. But maybe it's better off for you to go for that run by yourself and pick him up for the warm-up leg, you know?
Potentially, that's right. But it's also in part because in the dog culture, in the mainstream dog culture, we overemphasize the place of exercise and sport as being our dog's source of happiness, as being the reason why dogs are even alive. Meanwhile, I'm saying if you design your way of life correctly in a way that is appropriate to the stage of your relationship and the stage of your dog's maturity, then that is really what your dog wants, is to feel that they gel with you, that you have that relationship and you're getting through life together. It's not just about exercise or sport. It's about the relationship that you're sharing, doing those activities together. We tend to think that exercise is what's going to make our dogs happy, or sport is what's going to make our dogs happy. And don't get me wrong, those are very important aspects of a dog's life. But the relationship that is driving all of this is really what the dogs want and that we want. And going back to the idea of the border collie, Deb, about a 15 to 20%, I would say easily, of the clients that I see are Aussies or border collies or Aussie border collie mixes. These kinds of dogs that are incredibly intelligent. And indeed, I see the two scenarios. Scenario one, the couch potato life, and now this dog's going crazy, and then the dog's medicated. Then the other scenario is the dog where the human thinks, the guardian of that dog thinks that the only way to make this dog happy and sound is by the sporting life. Monday at barn hunt, Tuesday at agility, dog diving on the weekend, whatever else. And then very poor management.
Poor dog. You see kids like that, right?
Yes.
Kids who are so strung out because they're in a hurry to get to karate because they just left dance,
They're
And it's like, does this
overscheduled.
kid ever get to rest?
Correct. And the dogs also need the rest, but not only the rest, they need to come back to a situation that is structured, that is regulated, where they can rest. So I tell my people that if you're asking so much of this dog in the training arena and the herding arena, in trialing, in sport, etc., when you're coming back home, why are you asking your dog to now be social with everybody? The dog is spent. The dog is tired. They need rest. And I see it a lot where dogs that are very sporty come back to a home where there's other dogs, they're put together all the time. There's no one-on-one time, no one-on-one rest. And so this all pertains to the other pillar of the way of life method, which we're talking about, space and boundaries. If I have a dog that is very sporty, that is active, I need to give that dog some boundaries around the other expectations of life to help balance out the very high energy lifestyle with a calmer lifestyle when we're outside of the training arena, if that makes sense.
We're going to go to break, but before we do, I wanted to, you just reminded me of this dog I knew. His name was Spook, and he was a border collie. And the first time I went to meet him, because the owner said he was very destructive and he wouldn't come when called and he could never be off leash. And I'm thinking, what's the matter with you? Thinking that about the owner. How can you have a border collie who doesn't, like, this just made no sense to me because they're just so easy to train for someone like me. Anyway, so I went to this guy's house, and one of the first things the dog was doing that I witnessed was so adorable. It was taking the shoes of the tenant and the owner and just compulsively kind of rearranging them. So all the outdoor shoes would be on one side and all the indoor would be on another. And the dog would lie down and then he'd wait. And if no one said anything, he'd go back to the shoes and rearrange them again. All the men's shoes and all the ladies' shoes. And then he'd rearrange them again, but always in pairs too. And so one of the first things I had the guy do was the simple get my shoes. The dog started to get him his slippers. He started to get him his shoes. And it like gave a purpose to this thing the dog was already doing. The next thing I did was get them on a proper walking regime because the guy worked really long hours and he expected this adult dog to walk itself in his backyard alone. Like, that's not exercise. A yard and a dog alone is not exercise. So we're going to go to break and come back and talk a little bit about stimulation, I think, with Souha. Stay tuned, everybody, on Animal Party Pet Life Radio.
Molly, here's your dinner. Zeus, that's not your food.
Don't let that happen to your precious cat. Elevate your cat's eating experience with the Cat Tree Tray. The Cat Tree Tray keeps your cat's food off the floor and conveniently located on the cat tree. It's the perfect way to eat. It's a beautiful wrought iron tray that easily attaches to your cat tree and keeps dogs and other critters out of your cat's dish. A must for multi-pet households. There's a 6-inch tray for large bowls and a 4-inch tray for smaller bowls. Purchase your cat tree tray today. Go right now to cattreetray.com. That's cattreetray.com. CATTREETRAY.com.
Let's talk pets.
Let's talk pets
On Pet Life Radio.
Pet Life Radio.
PetLifeRadio.com.
Hello, you're back on Animal Party Pet Life Radio. And I might be able to dig up a picture of Spook and put that on my Deb Wolf Pet Expert Facebook site. Because he was one of the dogs that they used on the cover of my book. His owner, should have known better, quite honestly. His owner was a veterinarian, and he wrote the blurb on the back of my book, Good Dog, that I released back then. But he really did think that a big yard and a dog alone was good enough. How many times do you find that in your practice?
Oh, I come across it a fair bit, the idea that, well, we live on a big property, we don't need to go anywhere, or, we have a yard and we don't need to go anywhere. Now, here's the thing, though, Deb, is that, there's a time when it's actually appropriate to just stay on property for a little while and to just not go anywhere and use your yard to exercise the dog and then go back inside and go back out in the yard, exercise the dog, and then go out into the world. There is something to be said about doing that, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about here that people that
No. This guy was not outside with the
that's
dog. He was opening the door.
lifestyle. Yeah, let the dog out and then thinking that is enough stimulation. I see it sometimes in my neighborhood where instead of having them out in the backyard, they will put them on a long line in the front yard, for so-called stimulation. Now, evidently, that is not stimulation. I like putting my dogs out in the yard for what I call solo time. That is time where they're by themselves, resting, taking in the sights and sounds. But that is just one aspect of an otherwise rich day-to-day existence that also includes a bit of decompression and rest on their own in a fenced-in yard. That's certainly appropriate. But to think that alone should provide a dog, and especially a border collie, stimulation, no, that's not the way to go. And again, also, stimulation is not just exercise and sport. In my philosophy, I feel and I know that dogs can also feel deeply challenged and deeply stimulated and put on their toes when they can sense that the human that they are living with gets them, gets dogs, and is organizing life, running the show, governing the kingdom in a way that resonates deeply with the dogs. And that makes the dogs constantly now interested in figuring out ways that they can please us. And it's really magical and beautiful. And I encourage anyone who's interested in this line of thinking to explore it in my book, The Way of Life Method. And so what ends up happening is that when I am on top of things, that is also stimulating for the dog. Now, that doesn't mean that sport is not stimulating, that toys and games and hikes and sport and enrichment toys, they all have their place. But what is ultimately stimulating, I think, for a dog is a human that really gets dogs. That is very interesting and exciting for a dog. And what does it mean to get dogs? It means to organize the way of life, design the way of life with the 4 pillars that I discussed in a way that makes sense to the dog according to where we are in the relationship. So I've mentioned this point several times already, so let me talk about it. There are stages to relationship. There are stages to development. When I first meet someone, the relationship is different than this person and I 5 years down the road, than this person and I 15 years down the road. And again, for those of us who are parents, we see it in raising children. Childhood, adolescence, adulthood. I'm also a university professor. That is also another part of my career is being a university teacher. And I deal with my undergrad students quite differently than I deal with my master's students, than I deal with my doctoral students. Okay. And so that logic applies when I'm dealing with a dog, new puppy, new rescue, dog with issues that I'm trying to have a reset with, we go to stage 1, foundations. Foundations means I have a juvenile on my hands. Juvenile, regardless of age. Because if they're new in your home and they're at a loss as to what all of this is and what it means, they're kind of like a juvenile. If you've been dealing with reactivity and anxiety and aggression for years and years and years, the dog's development is stunted. So
Yeah,
there's
for
sort
sure.
of a juvenile. So I go back to that juvenile stage, which I call foundations. And then eventually we're able to kick in into adolescence, which I call exposure. And that is where I take my dog out in the world and I start to teach my dog things. But now I have foundations with that dog. I'm relevant. They want to learn from me. They care what I have to teach them. And then as they start to develop education in the world, success in the world under my guidance and with my leadership, now we're ready for adulthood. Adulthood now means integration, full integration of the dog in my home, in the family, with other dogs, dogs having freedom of choice, dogs having off-leash opportunities, playing with their friends. But we would have made our way there gradually. I would have had foundations to start, and then I would have educated my dog, and then the reward of education, the reward for doing well in the world, the reward for socializing appropriately with other dogs, people, vets, groomers, and other parts of a dog's life, eventually earned that dog their place in my home, their freedom in my home, their access to me 24/7. But we give this to dogs immediately, and then they don't have a motivation to work for it. Meanwhile, all dogs want to work for their place. And I don't care how big or small, fluffy, cute, Bully XL or Maltese, doesn't matter. They all want to earn their place in our home. But we give it to them immediately, unconditionally, without the benefit of foundations and without the dogs having proven themselves to us that they've earned, that they've deserved it with integration.
We touched a little bit about breeds, border collies, Aussie Sheps, and pit bulls. But I wanted to ask you, because I kind of divulged that I love working with border collies. There's a lot of dogs I love working with. There's some that frustrate me, though. And I want to know, is there a breed that challenges you or frustrates you?
Such a good question. You know, I would say no. And I would say no with confidence that it's not the breed that can challenge me. But what can challenge me sometimes is the human handler's understanding of the breed or their conviction that a breed cannot do this or is not able to do this. That is what frustrates me more, is when people put limits on what their dogs can do.
Can you give me an example? Like, not the name, but the type of dog and what they thought the dog couldn't do?
Yes. So, for example, I have a client of mine that lives in the city, has come a very long way with the dog. The dog is, to be able to take this dog places. And luckily, we live in cities. I don't know about Vancouver, but here in Toronto, we are able to take our dogs on buses and subways and trains.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fantastic. But we also need to have dogs that are confident enough to be able to handle it. So, just as an example, with this particular client, she was able to do an excellent job getting her dog on the train, getting her dog on the streetcar, but there's something about the bus that she felt he would have a hard time with, and she continued to think that he wouldn't do well taking the bus. And meanwhile, I'm putting pressure on her and saying, he can do the bus, and I want to talk to you at the end of the week, telling me that he did the bus and you took the bus. And I'll get a message saying, we took the bus. He was a little bit bothered by the sound of when
The
the
brakes.
bus, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
the brakes. I know. I've done that training before.
But otherwise, he was a
Trains have
champion.
loud brakes too, and
He
trucks.
handled it just fine. But I was, trying to get the human to see the potential in the dog. Now, does that mean that all breeds can do all things? No, of course not. But that is a far cry than me putting limits that may or may not be there.
Yeah. I mean, some situations where I have breeds, like there was this guy, he had this huge lake right next to his house, and he really wanted his golden retriever to be trained not to swim.
Right.
That was a tough one. Okay.
Right.
Like sometimes, or I have trouble sometimes with what I would call the simpler breeds. Like it can take a very long time for a pug to even learn its name. Have you not discovered this yourself? That some learn more slowly and have a lot of trouble with memory?
So learning slowly, learning quickly, absolutely. That I would place that in the department of, let's say, cognitive intelligence, Deb, right? The ability to learn new tricks, do different things, able to handle more complex skills like a border collie. I mean, they're just kings when it comes to,
And they're visual, so that's helpful too.
they're incredibly smart. And I have 10 years of herding under my belt. And so I have seen these dogs in action. It's absolutely beautiful. But I'm coming from a slightly different angle, is that if the way of life is organized correctly, even breeds that, let's say, don't get it as fast as, let's say, a border collie might, because the way of life is organized well and they're not stressed and they're handled well, and we're working with them according to who they are, they start to display a greater potential than perhaps we thought going in, if that makes sense. But absolutely, there are breed differences in terms of catching things and learning things.
Yeah, and things like Irish Wolfhounds and St. Bernards. I've had quite a lot of times where I've been hired just to teach them something specific, like don't be afraid of the stairs on our new house, or come into our new car. Our new car, which is the exact same model as our old car, and we bought the same model because we knew you'd have problems, and now you think you can't fit anymore.
Right.
Stuff like that would never happen with a border collie, right? Like it just,
Right.
or a poodle, a standard poodle. Can you imagine? Like, what mental lapse would it take for a standard poodle to make that mistake? But these dogs are huge. St. Bernards are worried they're going to fall through, and rightly so. So, so some of the breed differences, I think, are just common sense, really.
Absolutely, they are. Certainly they are. And to the point that you made earlier, sometimes there's just a very poor match between the people they want and the breed and what they want. I think it was around this time last year that I was on a call with a world-renowned surgeon who works, I mean, she's always in hospital, she's always working. And guess what kind of breed did she call me about? A border,
You're like,
a border
why?
collie.
Why?
A border collie that is in daycare every day, and that's also, the social stimulation is important, but it's been my experience. Maybe it's been different for you, Deb, but it's been my experience that with these working type dogs, the Aussies, the border collies, we think that social stimulation is what they want. It's been my experience that they are more about working as opposed to socializing. They're more about doing something that has meaning and purpose as opposed to just tearing around, playing with other dogs. They want to perform as opposed to just play. And this woman just could not, this world-renowned surgeon could not possibly meet that dog's need. And she was actually on some level even a little bit surprised when I said that I would want her to consider whether they were an ideal fit for each other. You know, she didn't think that a trainer would talk about fit, but I have to talk about fit and ask whether a person is really able to deliver what this dog needs. Sometimes we can compromise, but sometimes, as in this case, compromise was just not possible.
Have you ever had a dog you gave up on, or a person dog combo? You had to say to them, I can't help you anymore.
Not yet.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
Yes, not
Well,
yet.
everybody, that means she won't give up on you. If they want to reach you or get your book, how do they do that?
Excellent. So you can find out more about me and my Way of Life dog training at wayoflifedogtraining.com. You can find out more about the book and where to find it at thewayoflifemethod.com. That's the name of the book, The Way of Life Method, How to Heal Your Relationship with Your Dog and Raise a Sound, Strong, and Spirited Companion at any age. You can find on my website my blog. You can find at Way of Life Dog Training /newsletter, my newsletter archive, and a place to sign on for my mailing list to get news, to get monthly articles, events, updates. And for anyone who is reading the book and starting with the method and implementing the method and experimenting with the method, I would really encourage them to join a growing group I have on Facebook called the Way of Life Method Working Group, where people who are reading the book and who are challenging the method get to come together and share updates, ask questions. It's been wonderful to see how people are doing so wonderful with this method, but it is different, Deb. It's a different way of thinking about dogs. It's a different way of thinking about how to fix problems. We go beyond labels. We go beyond excuses, including breed excuses, including the excuses we make about these dogs being rescues and damaged goods and they're traumatized and they're never going to get better. You know, we look beyond all of that. I say until you've tried the way of life, you've not tried everything, because people who come to me tend to be folks who would have tried
Everything else first. That's
Yes,
right. I know.
exactly.
That's what I get too. I never get the easy come sit stay heal anymore. I get the
Exactly.
bit the nanny doesn't like grandma.
They would have gone to the corrective trainers. They would have tried different tools. They would have
Yeah.
tried medication, and they're not able to solve their problems. They're desperate, but also now open to a different way of doing things because nothing that they've tried has worked. And those tend to be, successful way of life clients. Those that have minor issues and have not tried everything, they're not really interested in the big makeover that I'm suggesting. They just want a little renovation. Meanwhile, I'm saying, I want a whole tear down, and then let's have another conversation about what the problem really was all about.
Oh, I love that. Like I get people who call up Camp Good Dog and they want to send their dog with a page-long list of problems, and they want me to fix it and
Yeah.
then send it back to them. And I say to them, well, I can fix all these things, but you have to come for a lesson and I'll teach you how to get the same results I get.
Exactly.
Oh, I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
Well, it's not a television. Like it doesn't just have a fuse that I need to switch and then we send it back and it works. It's not a vacuum cleaner with a, cut wire. The dog is perfectly good and he'll probably listen to me the first day. It's going to be a problem getting him to listen to you, lady.
Exactly.
And one thing, I don't know if you agree with this, but one thing I find the difference between people who, like you were mentioning, seem to have a knack or a way with animals and people who don't.
Yeah.
A huge part I see is not so much their intention, because the people who can't train their dog sometimes love it so much. They just spoil it with unearned
Yes.
affection. But is timing. That seems to me the big difference. People who reward their dog at the right time and people reward their dog at the wrong time. Because if you reward your dog for the stuff you don't like, you're going to see it over and over and over because you're confusing him. You're telling him that's what you want. And so if they could just hold off on the cuddles and the treats and the baby talk until he does the right thing, you'll have a good dog in no time.
Does the right thing, not only does the right thing, but becomes the healthier dog that they are within.
Yes. So like an example would be the dog's afraid of something, a couple of steps that you've taught him over and over and over again. But every single time you get to these 2 steps, he always balks and he waits for you to bend down and give him cuddles and love. No, just gently get him to go over it and then give him the cuddles and love. And within a couple of days, he won't even be afraid of those stairs anymore. But you've taught him that if he acts afraid, he'll get cuddles and love. So, all right, everybody. Oh, we have to wrap up. We've run out of time. You know how to get her book. You know where to find the Way of Life dog training. Thank you very much, Souha Ezzedeen, for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Okay, everybody. From Souha and me, Deb Wolf, and Animal Party, be good to your animals.
Let's Talk Pets every week on demand, only on PetLifeRadio.com.